I'm going to give you a brief survey of what God is doing through the ages. You can't understand the Bible if you don't know specifically what God is doing. It's called theological design. I'm going to make this real simple, please. Follow me so you can understand, because we're in Kings. And I'm about to show you a showdown that's going to happen between Elijah and King Ahab, okay, and Jezebel, who is killing a bunch of prophets. But you really can't understand the theological and the spiritual significance if you don't understand where that fits in the historical times and in the present time and what's going to happen yet in eschatological times. Okay? And I don't want to get down on anybody, but listen, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Knowing history helps prevent you from making really bad mistakes. You look at what's going on right now with the Muslims. Most people don't have a clue, even Muslims, what the Quran says and who Muhammad really was and the things that he did. And as a result, they make friends with them, they invite them in. Little do they realize that they're setting a trap. It's like a spider setting a web, just waiting for an unsuspecting, naive person, bug, to go in there so he can devour them. Okay, I got a chart back here. You're going to have to follow me or you're going to get lost, okay? But I broke it down real simple. They got real elaborate charts, but I don't want to show you all that. I'm just going to show you the beginning from these here. In the middle are all the kings of Israel. Listen to this even before I show you that. The length of time that Israel actually had kings was less than 500 years, 5 centuries. They had Saul, then David, and then Solomon. That was what was called a united monarchy. But following Solomon, his kingdom was divided into 2. 10 tribes and then 2 tribes. The 10 tribes of Israel and the 2 tribes, primarily Judah and Benjamin. Okay? They had both good kings and bad kings, mostly bad kings. A lot of the kings were murdered. A number of them committed suicide, and God just outright took a couple of them home. Okay? But for the majority of them, they were bad kings. In fact, Israel did not have one good king. Okay, they did have a queen, and she was even worse than the king. She even killed some of her grandsons in order to achieve power. Athaliah was her name. Okay, but where did these kings come from? Let's go back a little bit. When God created Adam and Eve, it was a theocracy. A theocracy meaning theocracy. God is sovereign king, like he's going to have during the millennium. Okay, well, that went. And that continued until the flood. And God had the flood because the people were so evil. They were just doing everything that was right in their own eyes. Okay? They basically, philosophically, they were autonomous. They answered to nobody, not even God. They didn't recognize God's kingship. Okay. From after the flood, you got the Tower of Babel. What did God tell the people after the flood? He says, look, I want you to go into the world and multiply and spread. The people were disobedient. What did they do? Oh, we're going to create this tower. It's going to go all the way up to the heavens. And so what does God do? He comes in and he confuses their languages. And what do people do? I played tennis with Filipinos, with Vietnamese, with different kind of ethnic groups. They hang with each other. Why? Because they can communicate. So it's only natural that they would separate that way. By the way, that's where you get babble come from. I say of psychiatrists, all they do is do a lot of babble. They babble a lot of nonsense and they make up a lot of terms in order to get you in bondage to them. But it's all babble. That's all it is. Okay, so they went, and finally they started to spread out. Okay, from Babel, you got all the way to Abraham. And Abraham is a significant person in history. Why? Because he's the father of both the Arabs and the Jews. Okay, he had one son, okay, that all Arabs and Muslims claim lineage to, and another son who all the Jews claim lineage to. Okay, so he had two sons. He had a son from an illegitimate birth, and he had a son from a legitimate, from Sarah. Okay, and then what happened was, from Abraham, you have then the patriarchs, the beginning of the patriarchs and Abraham's sons. And then you had others that followed him, eventually until you had judges. They don't have a king yet. King hasn't come yet. So they're being ruled by kings. I think the judges, I'm sorry, I think the last one was Samson. You know, and you know the story of Samson. He was there. He says, God, give me the strength just one last time. And he pulled down the temple and all these really bad people. Okay. After that, after Judges, the people of Israel were not satisfied. And they said, we want to be like all the other nations. You know, you hear that in the church today. We want to be like everybody else, contemporary. Okay? And God says, no, that wouldn't be good for you. I am your king. No, we don't want you as our king, but we want a king that we can see and that can lead us, a man's man. So what did they look for? They found Saul. Saul, a donkey of a man. Great big Saul stood up taller, and when God finally called him, he was hiding in the baggage department. He was very insecure, not a very good person. And then finally, that is the beginning of what's called a monarchy. So you have a theocracy to the monarchy. And that's what this is going to be in. You're now going to have kings and prophets. And prophets are going to come in the scene. Let me give you this line and then we'll get into the kings. In the kings, you have Saul all the way to Solomon. You have a united kingdom under Saul all the way to Solomon. Following that, there were only three kings. Following that, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting a phone call from this person. Look, hey, can you hear me? I'm in the middle of a podcast. Can I call you right back? Okay, bye. Okay, sorry about that. No, I almost said a bad thing. Okay, where was I? Okay, so you have your kings and you have prophets. Saul and Solomon. That was, listen to me, that was a united monarchy. Following that, it got divided. So now you have 10 kings in northern, not 10 kings, but 10 tribes of the northern, what's called Israel, and then two, primarily Judah and Benjamin, which we would call Judah, okay? And the whole period of time, and I want to really emphasize this to you, is that they only had a king less than 500 years. Okay. What happened then? They were so disobedient. You know, Moses, he writes the Pentateuch, he writes the Torah, he writes, and then you have all these other books that followed. You know, you got the historical books, you got the poetic books, you got the prophecy books, you got the major prophets, you got the minor prophets. And so the completed Old Testament is being written during that time. And so what did they do? They don't follow it. They twist it, they turned it around, they invent, they put other stuff into it. They're disobedient. They're still running into idolatry. Now you got to understand, I look at some of those idols and I think, how in the world can anybody do that? You got to remember, these people were involved in agriculture or herding sheep. You know, they were rural type people that were dependent on crops, on water, and so forth. So the Baal, the god that they worship, was a fertility god. And so they would appeal to him more than they would appeal to the Lord God. And they would create sacrifices to him. And God didn't want them to do that. He wanted these people to look to him to provide. Okay? But they didn't do it. So they go into captivity. Okay? You have Judah, which goes into Babylonian captivity. And you got the 10 tribes, the northern tribes, they go to an Assyrian captivity. Now they're in captivity. All the way until during this time, this is now God's done with Israel. Not in terms of the covenant. So a lot of people misunderstand that. The covenants are still in fact in force, especially the Abrahamic, the Davidic covenant. In fact, it hasn't been completed yet. It's still coming. Okay? But in terms of working with Israel as a nation, that's done. That finished when Christ came on the scene and they rejected Jesus. Okay, by then you didn't have a king. All you had was the Sanhedrin that was ruling over Israel. And they were inventing laws and creating. They were the blind. Jesus said it himself. They were the blind leading the blind. Okay, and so what happens then? It was during this period of time when God quit working under a monarchy that he turned over the political leadership, if you will, to Gentile kings. And you got a number of them, all the way from the Babylonians to Medo-Persians to the Greeks, and finally to the Romans. And they're eventually going to be a revived Roman Empire. Okay, now watch. If you can see this here is all the kings of Israel and Judah, all of them. I got them all listed. Under the kings of Israel, on this here where it talks about their character, all of them were bad. They all got an F. They all failed, every one of them. Under the kings of Judah and also Benjamin, they only had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kings that were good, and one's kind of so what. So it's during this time when Ahab is a king. Ahab is a king under Israel. Okay? Right here. And Elijah is on the scene. And eventually Elisha. And they're about to have a confrontation. Because God is sick of them worshiping Baal. And God has brought a drought on the land for a number of years. And he sent Elijah to tell Ahab, it's not going to rain. You're over here trying to run the Baal, you know, cutting yourself and yelling and screaming and acting the fool, trying to get him to bring rain. It's not going to happen. Okay, so he does a number of things, and he also prepares Elijah for this by sending him to a widow woman and making him dependent upon her and ravens that are bringing him food. And finally he tells Elijah, I want you to go confront Ahab. So Elijah does this. He goes and finds him, and he tells Ahab, I want you to bring all your prophets, both the ones that are Baal and Asaphat, a total of 850 to Mount Carmel. And we're going to have a showdown in the corral. Okay? And you're going to determine who is truly God. And this is where I'm going to stop, because the next message is the showdown. But I want you to see the big picture. They're in a 500-year period of time with kings, okay, under a monarchy. God wanted to be their king. They rejected him as a king. So he gives them human kings. What do? They fail under the human kings. So eventually they don't have a king anymore. Now they're led by priests and high priests and Pharisees and Sadducees and all that. And they eventually reject the Lord Jesus Christ. So bad that they told Jesus, the only reason you're able to do these miracles is you're empowered by the devil himself. Okay, Israel, Judah, Benjamin, all of them failed terribly. Okay? And God's going to usher in now something different. And you need to grab that. Really important. God bless you all. Stay tuned for me for the showdown at Mount Carmel.